Yeah, so I was preparing earlier in my life to actually become a lawyer, not actually become an economist. It wasn't until the Great Recession hit that I was in law school that I started realizing how like economic factors and financial factors were affecting the well-being of folks that I was thinking about, like from a justice perspective, from a legal perspective, and it was those changes in like the financial conditions and the economic conditions that I felt were not reflected very well in the law, and were not very reflective either in the policies that we were taking, at least back home. I'm from Puerto Rico, and that's exactly what I start thinking about economics. I start thinking about look how economics are affecting the economic growth in Puerto Rico in particular, and economic inequality. So in particular, I never thought about becoming an economist. That was never part of what I saw in my family, what I saw that was rewarded back home. It was literally the economic conditions that were happening. And so I think at this point it's good to have a background about like where I come from. So I come from Puerto Rico. And many people know that we are territory of the United States. A little bit less well known is that Puerto Rico is the second most unequal jurisdiction in the United States, behind DC. And you can see that. You can see a lot of poverty in Puerto Rico, and you can also see a lot of wealth. So you can like that disparity becomes very stark, and it becomes starker when you see economic events like the Great Recession, where you impacted disproportionately poor individuals. So I think part of many people have different issues and how to get to where they are. I think I didn't know how I wanted to approach the issue, so I didn't have the standard path that other economists had that they knew they wanted to be economics, doing economics since they were undergrad. I did my undergrad in math, then I moved to law school. At this point, I had never thought about economics, so it was a problem of uncertainty and lack of understanding what the career does. And then I had to like pretty quickly pick up a lot of tools that are very specific to the profession, that are beyond just the math and the topics, but it's part of the economics thinking in general that has been shaped for many years. So I had to pick up that very fast, and that was a little bit challenging because there's like a different uh, perspective in the way we approach the problems in each discipline. That was the main issue for me, and the secondary issue was completely leaving where I was coming from. So I never intended to leave home. I was happy there. It wasn't until I started thinking about the issues that we face that I start thinking about where I can train better, where I can actually like be with folks that are like-minded, trying to solve these issues for other reasons. And that's the secondary challenge I had. I think that speaks a little bit about the a challenge that is not about me. It's about I think about many communities in general, in particular about Puerto Ricans. So there's like every place where you go. If you're born in California, yeah, you have access to institutions that you don't have if you're born in a different state, unless you're perhaps in Massachusetts. So, like the location where you're born actually determines a lot of the opportunities that you have. And there's like amazing research by Racchetti and others on this. I think a challenge that we were facing is in Puerto Rico and back home, and this is true about many places in the United States. Uh, Thinking about economics wasn't something that was rewarded, wasn't even thought about, not something that was thrown upon either. It's just something that is not there. And that has implications just beyond information. That means that the institutions that are there that you require to train to become a good economist are thinner. So you have less of like a social network, a safety net if things don't work your way, and fewer mentors as well. Not because there are no mentors, it's because there are mentors in other disciplines. They are less a focus in there's a big focus in social justice, in community organization in Puerto Rico, and that's incredibly important. But that wasn't my place. That was the place of other folks. And that's a challenge I think that we were facing. I think is faced by the majority of people in the United States. See, there's only selected places in the United States where you can actually uh, fully train as an economist, and with all the opportunities and the implications that that has. For me, that has also implications about the representation that we have in the economics profession. If people, not only about how we look, not about ethnicity and race, but also about the diversity of thought. Like the people that are thinking about economic issues have very specific contexts in place that are determined mostly by the very richest economies within the United States. Thinking about California, thinking about Boston, New York. Let me talk about more specifically things I do in my research that I think are important. I focus a lot on dynamics of race in the economy. I focus quite a bit also in political economy problems and thinking in particular about voting. Um, and, um, and here I think things become very clear. So something I like to remark and remind folks outside in mainland US that is that the case of Puerto Rico is a large episode of disenfranchisement. So you have almost 4 million, about 4 million people that are US citizens that will be able to vote if they are residents of a different state. But because of, we can call it a loophole in the way our regulatory system works, uh, they cannot vote if they are in Puerto Rico. So basically, the idea is that you're not discriminating against folks if they because of their citizenship or the way they are, if they can vote in the mainland U.S. But in practice, we know that this is a de facto level of discrimination. We have 4 million people that are underrepresented, that are not represented at all, actually in Congress. They cannot vote for the president, but that they are affected directly by the policies that are taken in the federal government. In the particular case of Puerto Rico, right now we have a board of members that are appointed by the president that can veto uh, decisions that are taken by the political structures in Puerto Rico, including here our equivalent to Congress and our government. Uh, and that's problematic. We cannot vote for these individuals, and they can override some of the decisions that we have. So this is a large level of disenfranchisement that's taking place right now in present time, and that is driven a lot by explicit racism. So the the Supreme Court decisions that allow this to happen explicitly refer to to Puerto Ricans as alien cultures. So we are alien citizens that since we have a different culture that in some way allows to have these exceptions under the Constitution, under the rule of law that allow for this disenfranchisement to happen. So it's not only that this disenfranchisement is happening, it's happening also in large part because of racism. Because most Puerto Ricans are black to a large degree. So like we all, there will be a lot of variation in our in our blackness, but Puerto Rico is a black Caribbean country. And that's like driving a lot of the episodes of disenfranchisement. So something I like to emphasize is a lot of my work focuses on voting in part because of this disenfranchisement that happens in Puerto Rico. The other thing that I focus a lot is in race, and again, as I just like already was foreshadowing with my answer, uh, uh, blackness is important. It's an important component of Puerto Rico, not only racially and because of the phenotype that we have, and because we experience discrimination, specifically from the U.S. in large degree because of our blackness, but also because our culture is largely determined by the history of slavery uh, that we have back home, and to see that affecting uh, directly affecting public policy in the relationship between the United States and Puerto Rico, and the economics underlying that relationship is something for me that requires a lot more study. And and it's not something specifically to us. It's something that is a shared experience that we have with other disenfranchised communities. Yeah, so that's like goes back to the previous question. So in particular, I like and I think most Latino or Hispanic folks like also to identify with their particular way of being Latino because the history is different. I don't think I, as a Puerto Rican, can speak about the experience of Chicanos or Mexicans. Um, I can speak about my own experience as Puerto Rican and as somebody who does share a common experience with other Latinos in the sense that from the perspective of the United States, we are all lumped together as being Latinos, and we're going to experience that part of discrimination that is common. But there's also factors that are very specific, and one factor I think that is very specific for us is the legacy of slavery that we have in the Caribbean. I mean, the legacy of slavery in the Caribbean is part of what propelled the Spanish American War in the first place, like the desire from the South to actually have some exposure to having slaves after the Civil War. So, given that it was already impossible to do in the United States, you could try to do it in the backyard by having Cuba and Puerto Rico. The history of blackness is something that, even what is common in other Latin American countries, is different and is actually particularly strong in the Caribbean. So for me, like that, it has been one of the factors that shape our experience the most. Not only because of the relationship with the United States, but because also you can experience a lot of colorism in Puerto Rico, and depending some folks, depend the more black black is their heritage, the more colorism they will going to be experienced. So it's actually something you see even if people don't want to acknowledge it back home. So that has shaped a lot of what I try to do. The other thing that has been very important is also if you see in the context of thinking about voting in the United States, a lot of the we can say the progress of the legal battles that were fought pertain in particular to Latinos, in particular to Puerto Ricans. So many of the cases that actually were dealing with the Voting Rights Act, in particular Section 5, were actually related to discrimination, for example, in New York against folks that spoke Spanish and that actually didn't have the means to understand uh, uh, English when they were in the voting booth. Or requirements of education that were imposed, in particular, thinking about New York, because New York's where most Puerto Ricans were at the time, and still there's the largest community here in the U.S. In those experiences, this shape the electoral law that we have right now in the United States. Even if haven't solved any of the issues that we have right now in Puerto Rico, did help a little bit to uh, help have some progress with regards to the voting ability of non-English speaking communities, like definitely Hispanics, but also like did impact Chinese communities as well. So for me, the experience of being Latino just gives me a little bit, and I try to put an asterisk because I can only talk about my experience and not the one of other folks, but it does give me a little bit of a flavor of what we have gone through as a community, and also how that's helped the the United States to also evolve with respect to their treatment of race, and a lot of what we still have to go through because we are very far from that. Yeah, I think I mean, this is a real challenge. I think we as economists like to think that a lot of the process that we have in place is is inherently race neutral or ethnicity neutral or even like just like social class neutral, and it is not. And this is what we were talking about. If you think about economics, but I think also this applies to law as well. If you think about the people that are in positions of power, you think about the Supreme Court, think about the Federal Reserve. Uh, these folks are disproportionately represented not only for by white males, but also we're thinking about very specific places. We're thinking about New York, we're thinking about California, we're thinking about very specific places that have very different experiences, not only because of the race, but also it's a very subset of what the United States as a whole is. Uh, And that, even if these folks are well intended, they have they will naturally, as an institution, the institution we have limitations in the way they can enact policy, just because they don't have the information that only comes through living those experiences. There's like a academic formation and training that is fundamental, and this is, again, it is not denying the importance of academic training, but the academic training is not a replacement for experiences in a discipline that is explicitly that its whole purpose is to dealing with human issues, with like human interactions, into structures that are intended to improve the well-being of communities. When the structures that we're dealing is with respect to communities, we need representations from those communities. This isn't We're not talking about physics. We're like the nature will behave the same regardless of where you come from. This is not the case. So I think that's like something that I think there's awareness now. I don't want to take away merit of the progress that many people have been pushing in the profession. The work of Lisa Cook, for example, like we want this is important. We have had progress, but that progress is just beginning. We need to see that representation, and that representation is not happening in part because there's structural factors inside the way we choose economists to actually improve the economics profession, and that those factors are leading disproportionately to have folks that are like from very narrow communities. And I think it's good to be specific about what factors are those. So we disproportionately value, and again, I don't think this is specific to economics. I think this happens in many other disciplines. But in particular in economics, we value a lot pedigree. We value like folks that routinely come from uh, schools that have a brand name at their undergrad level, then at the PhD level, then at the placement level when they first place, then eventually throughout their careers. We focus a lot on schools that are like very research intensive, and that happen to be also schools that are very expensive in terms of money, and not everybody can afford them, not only because of the tuition, but because of other factors that we know, like lack of information about the that the ticket price of a school is not necessarily the one that a poor person will pay, but if that information is not available, that doesn't matter. Or also other things like just completely moving to another area where you have to afford housing, and when you don't have the means to afford housing. If we're thinking about places like California, this is not like a trivial amount. And even if you could afford it, the level of risk involved is high. You could afford it, but you don't know if it's worth the gamble. Whereas somebody else that comes from a richer background, they have a safety net where they can actually afford to take a decision and have made the wrong decision. So yeah, so I think it's like something that is, and I think again, I think many of these things are changing. For a long time, and many individuals wouldn't want to do economics because they didn't feel that the problems that the economic profession was were tackling related to the problems that they care about, and that they knew they were important. If you know poverty, like caretaking or inequality and important issues, and you don't see them well represented inside the top journals in QJE, AER, and so on, you're less likely to to apply to become an economist. And I think for many years, and again, I still think this is changing now, but for many years, many people that would become economists decided to choose other social sciences. They would become sociologists, or they would become political scientists. Or they would go directly to law school because they wanted to improve the community. Those places are great. I think we need a lot more community organizing. We need a lot more battles. But there's a need for economists that care about these issues as well, because this is a whole ecosystem. We need people that care everywhere. And we were losing very talented individuals for a long time to other professions because it didn't feel that it was represented. Again, I think now these things are changing, and my hope is that now the renewed focus on social issues and issues about race and about voting in childcare will motivate more individuals to come in. But my concern would be also that the other thing we could do, and that's something I don't know what's happening right now, is that we can still keep rewarding people that don't come from those diverse backgrounds, but that they decide they want to study these issues. So uh, I think it's important to have individuals that are. I'm trying to say this in a way that is tactful, but also earnest. Uh, I want, I would like that if we're studying issues about race, I want people that experience what like racial issues are. I appreciate a lot that there's like a general interest on this, but if we don't have representation in the experiences, even if we have representation in having good intentions and people caring about it, we are just having part of the picture. It's better than nothing, but I still believe we need a full picture about what are the real struggles that diverse communities are going through. And yeah, I'm definitely about talking about blacks and Hispanics in the U.S., but I'm also speaking about Native Americans. We don't have enough Native Americans in our profession. We have so many Asian populations in the United States, and we think about them as a monolith, which means that the particular struggles of groups are different. What like Chinese, Vietnamese, and Pacific Islanders are going through is different depending where they are from, and we don't think about it that way. Not because we are ill-intentioned, but it's because we are not allowing the diverse experiences of those groups to make it through the profession in such a way that they can educate both the profession and then make a contribution to the overall body of knowledge that is needed for policy making. So I think my hope is that this increased focus on inequality and racial justice is not something only that becomes to some level performative or only driven by ill intentions, but it also leads directly to diversity in the experiences because you don't know what you don't know. And the only people that can deliver that information is people that have gone through that. In having many people that have gone through that, because one person is not representative of a whole group either. So we cannot only have one person that goes through those experiences. We need many people that are going through those experiences so that that can be reflected more accurately in the knowledge we produce. I think something. I think this is common to everyone. I think my 18-year-old self was focusing too much on just getting a profession and doing something just for a career. I think I would say I would choose my goals more with my heart, with what I really wanted to do. Uh, that doesn't mean like not training and not, but I think in the end the brain follows your heart. So you choose your direction with your heart, and then the brain just makes it happen in a way that makes sense. That it's that you're taking wise decisions, not like completely arbitrary decisions. And I was lost for a long time. I didn't find what I wanted to do until late, until already had like gone to law school and already like was a professional. And I think if I had a little bit let myself just listen more, that what I wanted to do was caring about people, but also recognizing where my skills were, I would have taken better decisions faster. So I think, in particular, in my case, I know other people probably knew what they wanted to do and they had other challenges, but for me, was being completely lost about how to apply. And it was being lost in part was driven because I was focusing on the wrong choices. I wasn't thinking about what I really care about until later, and a little bit of fear too. I think, and this happens a lot to people from many communities. I didn't want to leave my community. I felt by leaving my community, I was doing less, and you have kind of some guilt. You are afraid of leaving your family, and I was. I hope I didn't have that fear. I think the one thing we really have to focus on is in increasing diversity of experiences. I really think, and want to be very stark about this. I don't think it's enough to just care about issues that affect diverse populations. We need to be have diverse thinking, diverse experiences, diverse backgrounds leading those changes. Because it's also dangerous to make changes that are only well intentioned when they are not do not reflect the reality of the communities we are serving. Because those bad policy can be arise from having good intentions. If you are inaccurate in the policy prescriptions that we have, there will be backlash. There will be lack of trust, especially from the communities we are serving. And there has been a lot of historical factors that support that we should have lack of trust. We have in every discipline, think especially about medicine, like experimentation on the bodies of black folks, of Puerto Rican folks, forced sterilizations everywhere, like nuclear. We have nuclear testing in the waters of communities that are not white. So this is like this routinely goes throughout history. So there's a lot of reasons not to trust institutions, and that's dangerous. And having policy that is even is well intentioned is not accurate because we never allow people from those communities to have a voice in the enacting of those policies. I think is problematic, and I think may lead uh, to further erosion of trust and to actually deterioration actually of the economic condition, economic well-being of those communities. So I think what I would expect my peers is to actually give space, not only be interested in these issues, which I want them to be, but give space to people from these communities to have a voice. And from many communities, I'm not only talking about just uh, blacks and Hispanics, but again, I want to emphasize Native Americans and the lesser represented Asian communities as well, that we just don't have them in the discussion many times. So yes, having leading, allowing a voice and diverse representation in the production of knowledge in economics, I think is crucial, and that's my main point.